Well, Pathway, welcome to week number 4 of this series that we're calling Hope in a World Gone Mad. Today is going to look really different in this message. I'm going to do something today I've never done in a message before. Let me help you to try to understand. Normally, when I work on a message series, when I work on a series, I lay out a very, very clear plan of where we're going on what week in a series. I believe that communication is vital in a church, and so I should do my very best and give communication my absolute best. And so for me, that means being prepared for messages. It means having a crystal clear plan on where a message is going. It means that when I preach, I practice my message multiple times before I preach it out, and so I do my best just to make sure that the message, that I've wordsmithed everything and I've worked everything out. And that's why normally when I preach on a normal Sunday, everything that I preach has a slide to it, my points have a slide to it, it's rehearsed, there's a reason I'm able to do it without notes, and it's because I take communication very seriously. Today, I'm going to go totally off script. I do not exactly know what I'm going to say in today's message. I've never done this with a message before. But this week I felt like God was leading me to just speak from my heart. To just take my heart for something and bring it out on the table. So I'm going to ask you to have a lot of grace with me in this message, because I don't exactly know what I'm going to say. And it's going to feel different. I gave the people in our tech booth about 7 or 8 different verses. I said, I don't know which of these verses I'm going to be using. Maybe some of them, maybe all of them, maybe none of them. They may have trouble keeping up with me. I'm not sure. We're gonna kind of run where the Holy Spirit leads us in this one. When I planned out this series weeks and weeks and weeks ago, actually months ago, I started planning out this Hope in a World Gone Mad series. And I knew that today was supposed to be a message where I was going to talk a lot about the racial tension and strife in our country, and I was going to try to give a lot of just really uplifting hope to you. I want you to have hope. At the time when I was putting the message series together, my thought in creating a series like this called Hope in a World Gone Mad is that I wanted to talk about things that were very real current events that we were walking through and figure out a way to inject hope into those things. So think about the things we've covered in this series. We talked last week about the election. I wanted you to have hope that no matter who gets elected, God is still in charge. He knows what He's doing. He's good. He has a plan. And I wanted to give you hope. Think about the first couple weeks of this series when we talked about being anchored in the rock of God, and we talked about how to have hope when your future is uncertain because of COVID-19. And in every week, I've tried to take a current event and inject hope into it. And so my plan for today, when I first planned this series out, was today was going to be the day where I was going to talk about the racial tension, the Black Lives Matter movement, and I was going to do my best to bring hope. In fact, I had a whole illustration. I was going to read a passage, which I may or may not read today. It was out of Revelation chapter 7, where God is speaking to John the prophet, and through John, God says that there's this picture of the kingdom of God, and all tongues and all tribes, every nation on earth is together worshiping God in their own authentic way. And it's this beautiful picture of the reconciliation of the nations, of the reconciliation of different types of people all around the throne of Christ. And I had this whole image I was going to do with it. I was going to pour a puzzle out on this table, and I was going to show you that I was going to put pieces of the puzzle together. I had this whole illustration I was going to do, and I was going to show you how Revelation 7 was showing us the completed puzzle, but today we only get parts of the puzzle of racial reconciliation. I had this whole hope-filled message. I was going there. I was so serious about this message and so committed to trying to make this good that I spent a lot of time working on it. I actually reached out to friends who have addressed similar topics in their churches. I called a pastor in Florida, and he's an African-American pastor, and I asked him about his life experiences, and he really helped me to understand the Black Lives Matter movement, and I really was working hard on this. I'm telling you all that background to say this. I had a plan coming into today. And then last Sunday night, another shooting happened. And it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking. It's the worst of the videos I've seen. I've intentionally watched as these shootings have happened against black men. I've intentionally watched the videos when they've happened. I don't recommend you watch the videos because they are painful to watch. But I watched the videos intentionally of several months ago, of Ahmaud Arbery being chased down in a neighborhood in Georgia. I watched those videos. I watched the videos of George Floyd losing his life on the streets when an officer was on his neck for 7 or 8 minutes. I intentionally watch these videos because I want to be aware of what's happening in the world, and I want to have empathy. And so as painful as they are, I force myself to watch them. I don't recommend watching them. They're hard to watch. And on Sunday night, another video came out. And this was, as I'm sure you all know, there was a shooting in Wisconsin. There's a video of a man named Jacob Blake, 29 years old. There was some kind of confrontation with police. I don't really know the details of the confrontation or what happened, but Jacob Blake ran away from the police. He was chased by cops with guns. He went to the other side of his vehicle. His 3 kids were in the vehicle. And when he opened up the door of his vehicle to get in his vehicle, an officer shot him in the back 7 times in front of his children. So that happened on Sunday night. And I just had a really hard time coming in and trying to inject hope. I felt like my plan went out the window. I thought, here I'm doing a series called Hope in a World Gone Mad, and I'm supposed to be giving people hope. And I wanted to give you hope that we could see the day when racial tension would end in our country, that we could work as the church to see the day when it would be over, I wanted to have hope that we could see the day when there wasn't this constant tension between the police forces in our country and the African American community. I wanted to come in and inject hope. And then on Sunday night, I watched the worst of all the videos I'd seen. Of all the videos I forced myself to watch, I think this was the worst one I'd seen. And so, Pathway, I'm struggling to come in and give you hope today. Jacob Blake, I don't know much about his life. I really don't know anything about the confrontation. I'm sure there was probably something he was guilty of and deserving arrest of. I don't know. I'm not sure, but he certainly didn't deserve to lose his life. And I don't know him. He's not in my family, but I hurt for him. I'm sorry. I'm so scattered right now. I apologize. He hasn't lost his life as far as I'm aware. I think he's paralyzed and in the hospital. I'm sorry for being scattered, guys. It's painful to watch. So today I am going to address racial justice, but I'm going to take this in a different route. I'm not going to try to just charge forward with a false sense of hope, because I'm struggling to have hope. But what I am going to do is introduce you to the one who can give you hope. There's a verse I want to read for you. I've got a few verses over here on my computer. I didn't bring a Bible with me today. Of course, my computer froze up on me. Hold on. There's a verse I want to read for you today out of Matthew chapter 11 that God is using in my life right now. And it's Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 through 30. These are the words of Jesus. He says, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, For I am gentle and I'm humble in heart. And you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. This week I've had to go to God with my frustration, and I've had to cast my cares upon Jesus, who is able to give me rest. And my guess is that there's many of you right now who need rest for your souls. Let me just name maybe categories of people, groupings of people that maybe you find yourself falling into. First of all, maybe you're a police officer today. Or you have a police officer in your family. Somebody you really love and care for is a police officer. And for you, you're so frustrated and you're so angry because you recognize that what happened this week in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and what happened in these other police brutality videos does not reflect you as an officer, does not reflect your family member. Maybe your dad or your uncle, your aunt or a sister, or somebody's a law enforcement official, and you know that they would never do what is showing up on video. And so for you, you're frustrated and you're angry and you're tired because you feel like all police are being demonized, when the reality is that not all police officers are bad. In fact, it's probably a severe minority of them who would enact violence unnecessarily on people. And so you're tired. You're tired because you feel like your profession, if you're a law enforcement person, your profession's being demonized, and you're frustrated. Maybe you fall in that camp. Maybe you're here today and you're a normal, everyday white American, and you're trying to live a good life, and you're trying to love and respect everybody. You have friends outside of the white community, maybe Hispanic friends or Asian friends or African American friends. You feel like you treat everybody fairly. You feel like you're doing your best to love people, and yet you feel like there's an assault coming at you all the time from the culture, telling you that maybe you're a part of the systemic racism problem, and there's something you've got to fix about yourself, and so maybe you just feel defensive all the time, and maybe you're just tired of feeling like you have to be on the defense and say, I'm not trying to be racist, I'm not trying to participate in racial injustice in this country, and so you're tired. Maybe you're watching this and you are a person of color. And the fatigue you're feeling is indescribable, because it just feels like the country isn't moving forward. Maybe you're in the black community, and you've been trying to say for years, this kind of stuff's been happening all around the country for a long, long time. We're just catching it on video now. Maybe you've been trying to say that. You've been trying to get the world to listen to you, to say, don't you understand that police brutality is a real thing? And don't you understand that injustice and inequality is a real thing? Maybe you've got so much anger boiling inside of you, so much frustration boiling inside of you because you feel like the world isn't listening. You're just tired. You're just tired. If you're coming from any one of those camps, and I'm sure there are many other camps than that, but if you're coming from any one of those camps, can I just tell you, Jesus is saying to you today, come to me. Come to me. If you're weary, if you're tired, come to me. If you're a police officer and you're tired, come to me. If you're an African American man who is scared for your life, come to me. If you are the mother of children with dark skin, and you're worried about what's going to happen when they turn 16 and they start driving, come to me. If you're a white individual and you feel like you're on the defensive and you're tired, come to me. Pathway, I have nothing to give you today. I have nothing to give you. But Jesus has everything to give you. And Jesus knows your burden, and Jesus knows your pain, and Jesus knows your frustration, and Jesus knows your anger. And his yoke is light. His burden is light. And he wants you to come to him. And the only way we're going to solve the racial problems in this country and see a day where the inequality stops and the violence stops and the rioting in our cities stops and the police brutality stops, the only way we're going to see that is if many, many people start coming to Jesus and casting their anger and their burden on him. There's another verse I want to share with you. Let me find it here. I'm sorry, I'm going to need a tissue, guys. Can you, when you bring one to me? Thank you. This is Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 9. And I want to read for you something that Solomon once wrote. He said, "Be not quick in your spirit to become angry, for anger lodges in the hearts of fools." That's Ecclesiastes 7:9. Be not quick in your spirit to become angry. Thank you, Julia. Thank you. I'm sorry, Pathway. Be not quick in your spirit to become angry, for anger lodges in the heart of fools. I felt a lot of anger. Maybe you felt a lot of anger. Maybe you feel anger and rage inside of you because when you're watching the news and our cities are burning to the ground and you're saying, this is senseless, what is this accomplishing, what is this fixing? Maybe maybe you're a person of color and there's just so much anger, so much anger, so much anger. How could the world be so unjust? How is it that black men need to be afraid of being pulled over? How? Just so much anger. Please, 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 don't let anger lodge in your heart. It will only come out as rage. It will only come out as violence. It will destroy your body. It will not help you. It will not fix the problem. There's not once in Jesus' ministry that he ever used violence to try to get his point across and to win people. In fact, I want to point to you the greatest hero that we know in our world today who has helped to fix the racial injustice problems. That's Martin Luther King Jr. He didn't use violence. If you're feeling anger in your spirit, I get it. I'm angry too. Please listen to what Solomon said in Ecclesiastes 7 and don't let the anger lodge in your heart. Take the anger to God and work with God through the power of Jesus Christ to fix the problem. Don't let anger lodge in you. But Pathway, as I say all this, I genuinely in my heart want you to go to Christ and to take your burdens to him. But I also want to use this morning to give us a tremendous challenge as a church. We are a predominantly white church. In fact, it's almost laughable to even say that we're predominantly white. We are almost 100% white in our congregation. Now, that's somewhat natural and normal because in the Mid-Ohio Valley, I believe the statistics are that 96% of the Mid-Ohio Valley is Caucasian, only 4% is anything other than Caucasian. So only 4% is Hispanic, Latino, African American, Middle Eastern, Central American, Pacific Islander. I mean, only 4% of our entire valley makes up that group of people. And so our church is very, very white. And as a white church, I think, and I'm just going to lay my heart out for you, and I'm going to ask you as I say this to not dig your heels in defensively. I'm just going to ask you to just hear my heart. I'm going to challenge us on something. As an almost 100% white church, we can have a great tendency to ignore or drastically minimize the pain that people of color feel in this country. For the most part, we haven't lived out their experiences. For the most part, we haven't experienced racism. Many of us have not experienced the level of poverty that many people of color have in this country. Particularly here in the Middle Ohio Valley, very few of us have experienced inner city culture and inner city lives. I realize some of us have not. And so what it means is that we have a tendency to minimize the pain of other groups of people. We have a tendency to feel like when other groups of people are crying out and are lashing out in response, which is what we're seeing in our cities. I mean, we saw the NBA shut down this week. We have a tendency to feel like that's totally overblown. I'm going to ask you right now, as a predominantly Caucasian church, to go to God and to ask Him to give you empathy in your heart. Empathy is different than sympathy. Sympathy is feeling bad for someone. Empathy is feeling with someone. And I'm going to ask you to have an empathetic heart. And if you struggle to have an empathetic heart, it's okay. Many of us struggle with it. I, at times, struggle to be an empathetic person. But Jesus can help you with your empathy. Jesus can help you. And we need to be an empathetic church. And Pathway, I just want to pour something out to you. We can't be a church that doesn't feel the pain of what's going on right now. Because if we're a church that doesn't feel any pain in this, I have a great fear that not only will we never reach the 4% of our community in our valley who are non-white, not only will we never reach them if we don't have an empathetic spirit towards their challenges that they face in a very white world, not only will we not reach them, but I have a legitimate fear that we will lose the next generation. I want to tell you what I mean by that. I want to use the 1960s as an example for you for a second to help you understand what I believe is happening right now. I think, as best I can hear from God, I think this is what God was showing me as I was preparing this message. When we as a world look back on the 1960s, of course the 1960s were before my time, but they were packed with racial tension, packed with racial strife. It was when Martin Luther King Jr. was at the height of his ministry and his work. And when we look back on the 1960s, history looks back with a narrative about what happened, right? And history looks back on those days and says Martin Luther King Jr. and the many people who stood with him to fight for racial equality and to fight for racial justice were in the right. But guess what? History also looks back and says, wow, there were a lot of Christians who were on the wrong side. There were a lot of Christians in the 1960s who were okay with segregation continuing, okay in fact fighting for the continuation of segregated schools, fighting for the sustaining of the laws that had a racist nature to them. There were a lot, particularly of white Christians who were absolutely on the wrong side of this. And we look back on history, and guess what we do with somebody like Martin Luther King Jr.? We name boulevards all over the country after him. And guess what we do with the people who are on the wrong side? We make movies about how bad it was. Hear me for a second. When the world looks back on 2020, years from now, right now, it feels like the thing everybody's going to talk about in history is going to be COVID-19. It feels like that's the biggest story of 2020. That's the biggest thing that took place. That's the most significant thing that history is going to talk about, COVID-19. History's not going to say much about COVID-19, guys. History is going to talk about what happened racially in our country this year. And when history looks back, Are they going to find us on the right side or the wrong side? Are they going to find us as the American church standing with people who are oppressed, standing with people who need justice, standing with people of color, standing with them and saying, this is not okay? The unnecessary violence is not okay. Is history going to look back and see the church having been out front, standing with people of color, saying, this is not okay? Or is history going to look back and say, you know what? The church put its head in the sand. The church had no answer and no response and no compassion and no empathy, and the church across America didn't really want to deal with this. And here's why that's scary to me. What's scary to me is that if we just put our heads in the sand and say this is an unnecessary topic, this is something that affects inner cities, it doesn't affect us here in the Mid-Ohio Valley, this is not something we should be talking about, if that's where we stand as a church, if that's who we are, then what I'm afraid is that we're absolutely going to lose the next generation of people. Because I want to tell you something, 20 years from now, my children's generation are going to be standing with the oppressed. I guarantee you, I promise you they will be. And if they look at the church and say, I'm standing with the oppressed, and I'm standing with the poor, and I'm standing with people in need, and I'm standing with people of color, and I'm standing with people who've had injustice in the world, if they're standing there and they don't see the church standing with them, they won't be in the church. You know, I have 4 children. My children are ages 12, 10, 7, and 4. They're Gen Z. I don't even know what Gen Z is yet. I don't even know how Gen Z is going to be defined yet, but I have children who are Generation Z. You have children who are Generation Z. Some of you are a little older. You have grandchildren who are Generation Z. Let me ask you this question, and this is a serious question. 20 years from now, when your children and your grandchildren are in their mid-20s and their early 30s, do you want to see them in the church or not? Because I'm telling you, they will be fighting for justice in this world. And if we aren't standing there with them, and they don't see us standing there with them to fight for justice, they won't be in our churches. The need to stand with people of color isn't just the right thing to do, but by the way, it is absolutely the right thing to do right now. It's absolutely the right thing to do. But the stakes are even higher. They are so much higher than right here, right now. The stakes are the next generation. The stakes are people today who are middle schoolers, young high schoolers. That's the stakes. Elementary age students, that's the stakes. One last verse. This one comes from the book of James, chapter 1. James chapter 1, verse 27, God says these words, religion, this is written through James, the brother of Jesus, religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. God does not accept religion that doesn't prioritize orphans and widows. And that term, orphans and widows, is a much broader term than just orphans and widows. God doesn't accept religion that doesn't prioritize people in need, people who are oppressed, people who are hurting, people who are facing injustice. God finds that to be worthless religion. Pathway, we don't have a worthless religion. And as long as I am the pastor of this church, we are going to do what we can to stand with those who are facing injustice, to stand with those who are facing oppression, to stand with those who are in need. And I'm going to ask you to stand with me. Because if you'll stand with me in this pathway, I want to tell you what I believe is going to happen. 20 years from now, not only are we going to see your kids and your grandkids in this church, I think we're going to see way more than 4% of our church being non-white. Because if the word gets out in this valley that we're a church that is a safe place and a loving place and a caring place and an empathetic place for people who are of African American descent, Hispanic descent, Latino descent, Middle Eastern descent, Pacific Islander descent, wherever they may come from, if the word gets out that we're a place that's safe, that we're a place that's empathetic, you're going to see people flood into our church to come to Jesus and find rest. So I'm just going to pray and I'm going to ask you to stand. I don't even know what it looks like right now. I don't have a clear next step. I'm just going to ask you to stand with people of color in this country who are facing a great deal of injustice right now. Let's pray. God, help us to have the heart of Jesus. Help us to be empathetic. Help us to hurt where it is appropriate, but also help us not to let anger get lodged in our hearts. God, help us to be like Jesus to our community right now. For anybody today who is hurting, anybody today who is weary, anybody today who is tired, would you help them right now to come to you because they need rest? Thank you, Jesus, for giving us rest. Amen.